Hello, I'd like to welcome you to this CLE course on licensing. My name is Eric Hanscom. I'm a patent attorney with Intercontinental IP in Carlsbad, California.
My name is Lionel Boscheberg. I'm a California and French attorney, and I have lots of experience in licensing, so hence my presence here.
Hi, I'm Todd Langford. I'm also with Intercontinental IP, and I'm a patent attorney here.
So we're going to talk about licensing today. There are three things that an inventor can basically do with an invention, and licensing is just one of the three. So for the general practitioner who has an inventor show up at his or her office, a lot of times the inventor will be questioning exactly what they can do to try to make money off their invention. Well, there are basically three ways that I've seen that people can do it. The first is they can make it and sell it themselves. The second is they can assign their patent rights to another company or to a person, as in they sell their patent rights. The third is a rental of their patent rights, which is a license. And so we're going to be covering the third of those, which is licensing your patent rights to another person. First, though, let's go over some of the advantages and disadvantages of the different means by which an inventor can try to make money off their invention. So the first is making it and selling it yourself. Now, to a lot of the inventors, when they first walk into your office, they're going to say, well, I want to make it and sell it myself because then I get complete control and I get to keep all the profit. That's true. If you are the person who makes it and you're in charge of selling it and finding the retail outlets, that's true. You indeed do get to decide everything. You get to keep all the profit. However, you also get all the headaches. So real briefly, if you want to make it and sell it yourself, let's go through the timeline here. You've got a product. You probably shop it over to China, find a factory there that either makes that product or something similar, and you find the factory that basically has the assembly lines all set up to make it. So you have to go over there, find the factory, get them all set up to manufacture. And by the way, they want to get paid up front, at least a third of the money before they start manufacturing. Once the products are finished, they're put in a container, usually a 20 or 40-foot container, thrown on a truck and taken across the border at Lo Wu into Hong Kong. Then they arrive at the freight forwarder. Now the freight forwarder's job is to take the containers and put them on the right boats heading over to California. Or if you happen to only buy several pallets worth, their job is to get your pallets into a container that's going to Long Beach with similar objects that aren't going to crush yours. So once the freight forwarder has done his or her job, the products are in the boat and they're heading over to California. Now, back before the recent recession and the increase in gas prices, you used to choose between fast boat and slow boat. Fast boat would generally make it from Hong Kong to Long Beach in 12, 13, 14 days. A slow boat generally would be about 3 weeks. Well, boats happen to operate like automobiles, which means that they operate most efficiently at partial speed, not full speed. So right now, the fast boats are taking about 3 weeks. Slow boats can take over a month, which has caused a major change in the way that small inventors are doing business with China, in that somebody has to pay for all the time that product is sitting on a container ship going across the Pacific. And so anyway, it's not quite as efficient to get goods manufactured in China as it used to be because of all the time they're just sitting on the Pacific, traversing the route from Hong Kong to Long Beach. Now, once they get to Long Beach, they have to go through customs. And once they go through customs, some retailers like you to ship it directly in the container to their headquarters. They then break it down, throw it into other containers that go on trucks that go out to the retail locations. Others like you to break it down, in which case you, the inventor, have to have a warehouse, usually in El Segundo or Long Beach, and you have to handle that. You also have to be in charge of getting the product to a store, and you have to have found a store that wants your product. Once you get the product to the store, you have to deal with all sorts of the intricacies of dealing with retail outlets, such as packaging requirements. Is the barcode the right place, the right size? Are there the right number of inner cartons for a master carton? Are the right number of products for an inner carton? Did the products arrive on time? And so there are all sorts of kind of rigmarole regulations you have to go through. Otherwise, most of the larger retailers will fine you for failing to follow these. You have to deal with things like advertising allowances, product placement charges, and things like that. You also have to account for all the goods that are made. And so you want to compare the manufacturing records to the freight forwarder's records, to the customs records, to the retailer sales. And if 50,000 products disappeared somewhere there, you want to find out where they went. And there are a lot of unforeseen circumstances you also have to deal with when you're dealing with retailers. So if your inventor wants to make it himself or herself and sell it, great, all the power to them. They get complete control. They get to keep all the money that's left over. However, it's going to become more than a full-time job for one person. So the second route they can go, they can do an assignment of patent rights. Now, an assignment is basically a sale. And so you may say, you know, I own the patent to this 3-member nutcracker right here. I'll sell it to you for $500,000. Now, assignments are usually the second most desirable alternative to people who come into your office, because the idea of just selling patent rights and being done with it and just getting a big check is very desirable. The problem with that is that most inventors have a very twisted idea of how much their invention is worth versus how much somebody is going to buy the patent rights. So if somebody comes in with a patent on something and they say, I want $1 million for it, well, the prospective retailer is probably going to say, well, you've never sold one of these. How do I know it's going to work? I'm going to have to set up the factory. I'm going to have to do packaging. I'm going to have to market this. You know, I can't give you more than $5,000 for it at this point. And so often with assignments, you have a huge disparity between what an inventor thinks the invention is worth and what a retailer or a manufacturer or a packaging company or anybody else who might want to buy the patent rights thinks it's worth. As a result, assignments usually don't go through very easily. And if they do go through at all, both sides are having to make major concessions. So the third alternative is licensing. And licensing is kind of both sides meet halfway. One of the attractive features of licensing is you can test market. It's kind of like trial dating before you have to marry somebody, in that you see how the relationship is going to work. You see if the person you're licensing your rights to can sell as many as they say, and the person who's going to be selling the products and manufacturing them, they get to kind of test the market, see if it's going to sell before they have to commit any serious money to the inventor. So anyway, licensing is often the third most attractive option to inventors, but it's often the one where they end up because they don't have the money to fund the whole thing themselves and because they can't find anyone willing to pay them for the invention what they think it's worth.
But Eric, there's also some hybrid situation where you assign your patent, but in exchange of, let's say some down payment and some royalty, so that you would be associated with, the success of the product.
Yes.
So that it's not licensing, but it's close because you are giving up the rights on the patents, the ownership, yeah, but you can still benefit from the success of the sales of the products.
Sure, and I think you'd have to compare that to a licensing situation where you're not giving up your patent rights. You still have them. You're just letting somebody else manufacture and sell the object. And I find perhaps with a sophisticated inventor, they'd be up for an arrangement such as the one that you're suggesting. I find with a lot of inventors, they're very paranoid about giving up what they see as their rights because basically no matter how bad their invention is, they all think it's worth $1 million. And so they're just saying, I can't give up my patent rights for this. But yeah, with a sophisticated inventor, I think that would be a good
and sometimes it's also a business model for non-practicing entity to come and say, oh, you have a very nice patent, let me help you. Give me the property of the patent. I'm going to pay all the fees, and
Sure.
It's also one of the things that is an advantage to license to assign is who pays for the fees for the US PTO and when you extend internationally. So the non-practicing entity would come and say, look, give me the patent and I would monetize it for you. You would I have strong arms and I can get lots of money because I'm a professional in the licensing.
Sure.
So that's also something that sometimes comes up of assigning the patent, but to get some return through the royalties.
And especially for a small inventor, often going to a company that's does this as a profession is a good route to go because oftentimes an inventor will not be good at inventing, getting it made, doing the business end of things. They're better off finding somebody who can take over their invention partway through and trying to turn it into some dollars. Now, the other thing that goes on whenever you're dealing with assigning your rights and who pays the prosecution fees, what countries do you file in. I think you have to be very clear about who controls that and who pays for it, because obviously as an inventor, you don't want to leave all the decisions with your assignee, because they may say something, well, we want to file a surfboard patent in Mongolia, and you're the surfer and you're saying, no, it's never going to sell. And they're saying, well, I'm sorry, we're going to file it anyway, and by the way, we're taking that off of the net profits, so you're not going to get as much. So you want to maintain some control. At the same time, I think it behooves the inventor to approach such a relationship with the thought in mind that they're having to go to somebody to buy their rights because they don't have the money to do it themselves. So they may want to listen to the company and hopefully combine their knowledge to create a successful business.
Mm-hmm. And there are some certain situations where licensing is really your only option, like software.
Yeah.
If you invent something, you just can't, you're not going to necessarily assign each individual piece of code to the user. You have to license it. So sometimes, you say it's a third option. Sometimes it's the only option.
That's true.
That's true.
Yeah, if you're an average software developer, do you have the money to write the entire program, process it, do all the marketing? I mean, I think software licenses, they get on the average 7 to 11% or something like that. Do you want to take that and have Microsoft or Apple's clout behind marketing your product, or do you want to try to do it yourself on eBay? I'd rather take 1% of what Microsoft could do than try to hassle with selling it out of eBay and having the packages be in my garage. That'd be kind of a bummer. So when we talk about licensing, one of the important things is to decide what do you have that you're going to license out. I remember a conversation I had about 8 years ago with somebody who said, well, I'm just going to license out to an investor. And I said, what were you going to license out? And they responded, well, that's a good question. Okay, that's the kind of thing you probably should figure out before you're going to decide you're going to license out something, is what do you have that you're going to license out. Now, we're going to limit this to intellectual property, but with respect to intellectual property, you can license out your patent rights basically at any stage of the patent prosecution, from I just filed on this with a provisional to I have an issued patent in my hands. You can license out a trademark. You can license out copyrights. Basically, any type of intellectual property, you can license it out. So at the risk of boring any IP attorneys who happen to be watching, a patent gives you the right to exclude others from making, using, or selling the invention in the country in which the patent was granted. So for this little device, this is a 3-member nutcracker. The client in this case got a utility patent on how it works and a design patent on how it looks. We've also got a mouse pad here. This is made by the company called Funk. This is trademarked so that everybody knows this is a Funk mouse pad as opposed to being a Microsoft or an Apple mouse pad. So trademark protects the brand identity. Then we pulled this book off our shelves. This is called Selected Commercial Statutes 2006 edition. Probably not the most entertaining thing around, but anyway, they did copyright at least a portion of this book. So a copyright protects artistic creations, which in its traditional sense would involve books and magazines and musical performances and things like that. For your average inventor, you want to remember that a copyright can also be used to protect a website, packaging, owner's materials, things like that. Basically, anything associated with an invention that could be called art, you can protect with a copyright. So you general practitioners and business attorneys, when you have the clients come into your office and you start talking about their options, and they say, oh, I don't need a copyright, that's just for Rolling Stones and the Beatles. You say, no, actually, it can protect your website. And that's, again, especially in this day and age, one of the most valuable things that you can have as an inventor is a website to show off basically what your product is all about.
One other thing to consider with what you have to license is whether you own it at all.
That's true.
There are many clients that come in and they've got an idea or they've come up with some new design for something, but as it turns out, somebody else made the design. They paid somebody else for the artistic artwork, or they paid somebody else for the actual inventive process. So when you're looking at what you can license out or assign or even manufacture yourself, you do have to be careful that you or your client actually owns that intellectual property before you attempt to license it out.
And also when you are licensing in, you want to make sure that you are licensing to the right party, that there's a clean chain of title. Otherwise, you will be paying for pretty much nothing.
Exactly.
So it's and also one of the thing is as a due diligence is to make sure that when you want to manufacture something, you have everything covered. You know that you may have to license in from someone else because it's also part of the process. So that's before licensing in or out, you have to make a determination of what's at stake in terms of the rights and who owns what. That's definitely the first step before.
What it is, and do you even own it?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And remember that a patent, to quote the statute, gives you the right to exclude others from making, using, or selling. It doesn't mean that you can necessarily make it. You may need to get somebody else's license to make your product. So, yeah, you've got to figure out all these things. It all goes into a business decision. Is this worth it? What am I getting, or what is my client getting out of this license? And does it make sense to go forward? If I'm licensing technology, I need more technology to license before I can even make it. Okay. So the first thing you need when you're deciding to license is you need something to license. So presuming that you figured out what you have that you want to license out, you need to look for prospective licensees. And there are a number of ways that you can do this. I'm a big fan of trade shows, and I tell especially a lot of our smaller inventors, I'll suggest they go on Global Sources or Alibaba or one of these Chinese sourcing websites and look at the trade show calendar and try to find some trade shows that are coming up nearby. Now, in my opinion anyway, the best trade shows are in Hong Kong, but here in Southern California, we have 4 decent trade show venues all within driving distance of San Diego County, where we're located, San Diego, Orange County, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas. And so I urge that they look for some trade shows that are coming nearby, and then check out the exhibitor list to look for companies that are practicing similar technologies. These companies, they could be your competitors, they could be your licensees. So often you want to start compiling a list, and I suggest people do this on an Excel sheet so they can alphabetize it, do that sort by row function, so they can keep looking, and if the same prospective licensees keep coming up time after time, that's probably somebody that they should try to meet by going to a trade show. And now again, obviously, you want to be patent pending before you go to the trade show. I shouldn't have to say that, but I do. You'd be amazed how many situations you hear about or you run into where somebody says, "Yeah, I went to a trade show 3 years ago and I had a booth, and now I want to patent my invention. Can I?" Well, probably not, because you did a pretty major public disclosure at this trade show if you changed your invention any. But so you want to make sure that the timing's right there. And so anyway, trade shows are a good way of figuring out some people you might want to license to. Retail outlets are another good source. So if you happen to have invented something like this is a salt shaker that has a beveled weighted top. So after you're finished shaking out your salt, you flip it right side up. The beveled edge just seals off the water vapor, so you don't end up with a bunch of coagulated salt in your salt shaker. If this is your invention, well, you probably can go to Crate and Barrel, see who makes similar products. You could go to Costco, you could go to Walmart, Kmart, Vons, Ralph's, see who makes these type of salt shakers. These could be the people you could try to license to. Now, when you're looking at a product, the other thing I think that's worth considering is you generally have 4 levels at which you can try to license. We'll just keep with this. The first is you could go to the actual manufacturer, which is a company in China that makes items similar to this. You could go to that company and say, "Hey, company, I've got the rights to a really cool new salt shaker. Would you like to take over these rights and start making this?" You could also go to a packaging company. Now, I use the term packaging company to cover a company that doesn't make it and they don't sell it, but they put it in their packaging. So a packaging company goes over to China at a trade show. They look at the 100 or so products out there and they say, "Can you make these 3 for me? Here's what I want the packaging to look like. Crank me out a 20-foot container load. We'll bring them over and try to sell them." So you could go to the packaging company. You could also go to the retailer. You could go to like a Crate and Barrel and say, "Hey, you want to be the only person who can make this? I don't care where you get it made. I don't care whether you put it in your packaging or your house brand's packaging. Just get it made and pay me." And then the last level at which it isn't really a license, but you can try to sell it, is you can sell it yourself. And you're talking about a fulfillment house or eBay, something like that. So there are a number of different levels at which you can try to license out a product.
But when you say you want to sell yourself, so that means that it's also the beauty of the licensing is that you can also reserve the right to sell.
Mm-hmm.
You can just make sure that you can allow for certain territories, for certain products, for certain markets, and so it's not the all or nothing. You can just adjust and fine tune according to the market needs, basically.
Well, that's the great thing about licensing is that there's so many different options, so many different ways that you can form a license. As you said, there's territories, exclusive, non-exclusive, time periods. We'll get into a lot of this stuff in a minute, but it really is almost the sky is the limit as to how you can, structure such a deal. You may take care of everything but the actual selling part, or you may have everybody else. You license other people to do everything, then you just do the final selling yourself. So, as you say, there's so much you can do.
I tend to, object to the skies of the limit because you may have the antitrust laws as the limit in terms of what you can do in terms of.
It's not the universe; it's just the sky.
Yeah, it's just the sky. Okay.
Yeah. So what I find often is when we're discussing these issues with clients is that I urge them to try to keep control over the things that they really like and they're really good at. These are not necessarily the same thing, unfortunately. But if you find a client who's really, they love traveling to China, they love overseeing factories, they love going to Hong Kong and having the fancy dinners and attending the trade show with their manufacturer. If they really love that, then maybe they're cut out for that. If they've never traveled outside of the United States before, probably overseeing factory management is not something that they're going to want to do. If they've got a family at home, that's what I hear quite frequently. I can go to Hong Kong, but only for a day. Well, okay. You're not even going to be able to go there for a day. You're going to go there for 30 minutes, and you can't even get into Hong Kong from the airport in 30 minutes. So you're not cut out for that section of the invention process. But I think that's really worth doing is sitting down with your client and figuring out, what do you like doing? What part of this are you good at? What can you do? And what can't you do?
Yeah.
It all comes down to, it's a line from the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie where Captain Jack Sparrow turns the boom into the Will Turner character, and he's out there hanging. And Captain Jack Sparrow says it all comes down to what a man can do and what a man can't do. So it's got to be the same thing as a client. What can you do? What can't you do well?
Did you get a license to use that phrase?
No, I didn't.
It was a fair use privilege.
Jason, you're going to cut that out, right? So assuming now that you know what your client wants to license out, and assuming that your client has found a prospective licensee, you have to prepare for approaching your prospective licensee kind of like an inventor would approach a potential investor. And the better prepared you are, the better a chance you have of landing a good licensing agreement. So if your client has prepared a provisional patent on elcheapoprovisionals.com and they have a prototype that they made in their garage with a hammer and a vise, and their business plan is basically, I'm going to go out and sell this thing, you're probably not going to get a very good licensing deal. So, in terms of the preparation you want to go through, what I always tell our clients is I suggest they look at a quick pitch competition. And there are a couple of good quick pitches that I've seen. Here in San Diego County, we've got the Tech Coast Angels quick pitch, and then there's the Cal State University San Marcos quick pitch. And there in 2 minutes, these people have to have down basically an entire business plan. So I definitely think it's worth mentioning to your clients that they want to come up with a decent business plan, because any prospective licensee is going to want to figure out what they're getting. And again, if they're getting a provisional patent that was written on the back of a napkin and a crummy little prototype, you're not going to get a very good offer. Whereas if you can convince the licensee that maybe it isn't an ongoing business, but at least it's a proven product, that it's got some good intellectual property in place, that you've done your prototyping work with some quality engineering firms, that you've gotten maybe the opinion of an engineer that this will indeed work, I think you're going to greatly enhance your chances that you're going to end up landing a licensing deal that your client will be happy with.
But that's the situation where the prospective licensee is not manufacturing or selling a product similar to what's in the scope of your patent, because that is a completely different animal in terms of the approach. you
Yeah.
have to be careful not to
Very.
threaten the prospective licensee, which also is a potential infringer. So
Correct.
you have to play it very nicely with your patent attorney to make sure that you are not going to trigger a reaction from the prospective licensee slash infringer
Yeah.
that could, launch a counterattack by the way of a declaratory judgment.
Yeah, you don't want to start a prospective licensing agreement having to defend against a declaratory judgment. That's for sure.
But
Yeah.
we are what you were contemplating in more the situation of you want to convince of a new invention, a new product, and someone
Yeah.
would take over hasn't thought about it, and
Sure.
you have to
Yeah.
convince as an investor that
Yeah.
it's a good solid business plan.
Yeah. But your point is a good one. It brings up another point that I think that we probably need to reiterate here, and that is that your potential infringers, your potential copiers, they are also, in many cases, your best potential licensees. And so you do, especially you're talking about patent rights, you do have to be careful going out there and rattling your sword. And there are unfortunately cases out there that basically say an invitation to a license can spawn a declaratory judgment. So, exactly how do you word that first approach? That's an important issue.
So yes, now comes the fun stuff, the
Yes.
negotiation of terms of the license. The first thing I think we wanted to cover was basically exclusive versus non-exclusive rights. And to me, they seem like simple terms. It's exclusive or it's non-exclusive. It's solely this one thing or everybody gets to do it. But I feel like once you actually start to get down and look into what does exclusive and non-exclusive mean, it gets pretty interesting, pretty fun. So, with exclusive, what it sounds like is you can't sell basically more than the same thing twice. You exclusively give somebody the rights to practice your invention. You cannot then grant those same rights again. Non-exclusive is pretty much the opposite. You can non-exclusively grant that same right multiple times to whoever you want to do it to. Where it gets a little bit fun is when you almost have these hybrid situations, where I'm going to grant you an exclusive right to manufacture the goods in the United States. So that means that you can no longer grant that same right to somebody else to manufacture those same goods in the U.S., but that doesn't prevent you from licensing it to somebody in France. Right.
Correct.
With an exclusive right, because you're not allowing anybody else to do it, the royalty rates are often higher, right? Because they can basically say, I'm the exclusive licensee. I'm the only one that gets to do this. And obviously on the other end, the non-exclusive right means that you're going to have, or potentially have, another competitor. So if I'm licensing something here to Lionel, and a non-exclusive license, he may go out there and say, hey, I'm going to sell this product to all these people over here in Southern California. And then lo and behold, next week, I give that same non-exclusive license to Eric, who floods the market with the product. So, that's one of the things to think about when it's exclusive versus non-exclusive. And then the other thing that kind of popped into my head was if you grant an exclusive right to somebody, even if it's for a particular region, you probably want to have minimums or some kind of guarantees that they're actually going to make you money off of this license. So, for example, once again, I grant an exclusive license to Lionel this time to sell widgets in Southern California. And he says, thank you very much for this license. I will give you 10 cents a widget. Great. I think he's going to sell a whole bunch. And then he sits on his thumbs for 2 years and doesn't do anything, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
At the same time, if I were to grant him a non-exclusive license, he doesn't have to sell anything, but then I can go ahead and once again give it to Eric and get my 10 cents a unit after that.
There's also some hybrid situation where you give some exclusive rights, but at the same time you reserve the right to sell yourself, so that you still have the ability to improve the product or to make sure that you still retain some control. That it's not completely it's not typical, but that could happen. So when you draft this the exclusive rights, you have to make sure that if you want to be sure that the licensor is not going to also practice the invention, you have also to exclude that.
Well, that's a very good point. Whether you're on the licensee or licensor side and you're dealing with an exclusive agreement, you really do have to, clearly spell out, does the person that's licensing it also get to practice what they're licensing? Because if you just say, I'm going to grant you an exclusive license, in theory, that means that you can no longer do it, even though you're the one that owns the property. So now we can also talk about the scope of the license that's granted, whether exclusive or non-exclusive. And when we say scope of the license, there are things like making it, using it, selling it, and even modifying the invention. So when you talk about a license to make, you can limit the licensee to only manufacturing the goods. So I could grant Lionel here a license to manufacture my widgets, but then he can't sell them. All he can do is make them. He might make them for other people, he might make them for me, but he can only manufacture the goods. He can't actually sell them on the open market.
But can I have someone else manufacture the products?
Well, depends on the contract.
I was actually going to get to that in just a minute with distinctions of sub-licensing. And that's another kind of different scope of the license is I may grant you the right to manufacture it, I may grant you the right to sell the goods, but that right may stop there in the sense that there's no sub-licensing, or there may be a sub-license included with it. And why is that important? Well, as you pointed out, a manufacturer, I may grant you the right to make it, but you may not be able to make it. Or put another way, you may want to make some of it, but you may not have the capacity to make all of the goods. So if you're on the end of the licensee and you're getting a license to manufacture the goods, you might want to make sure that you also have the right to sub-license out your rights, such that if you become overwhelmed or incapacitated for whatever reason, you can still meet your obligations, whether it's to the licensor or to some other third party, through the use of the sub-license.
But, most of the companies in the U.S., they don't have necessarily their facilities in the U.S. to manufacture. They have a partner in China that manufacture for them. So it's most of the time you need to have the sub-license because you don't own, you're a fabless company, you don't own any factory, you just have contract manufacturer that manufacture for you. So then you have to be, the licensor has to be very careful about this because the IPs could end up in the wrong hands, and so how to protect, till the very end your invention.
I think you almost have to have the right to sub-license out in cases of larger appliances. For example, we talked earlier about how the fact that now Fastboat's making it over here in 3 weeks. A lot of the companies that make larger goods are making them down in Mexico, but they're not making them in Mexico. They're assembling them in Mexico from goods that are manufactured in China. So obviously, if you're taking a license from a refrigerator company or something like that, you don't want to have to make each individual little screw. If so, you're kind of screwed. So yeah, it's probably nothing that you really want to take on.
And sticking with sub-licensing, there are certain things where you license that you do not want to sub-license. Software, for example. You want to give somebody the right to use the software, but you don't want to give them the right to also sub-license it out. Or basically, they can simply resell your product simply being the license itself. And that also gets us to one of the other scopes, which is the use of the invention. When you're talking about one of the scopes, you may give somebody the right to use a particular piece of intellectual property, and oftentimes this can be trademarks or copyrights, where they get the right to use your brand name to make their products. We'll get into quality control a little bit later. But the use of the IP, once again, is often, I would say, associated with no sub-licensing it, because you don't want to basically let anybody just simply reuse it unless you have some kind of royalty schedule or something like that that anticipates, these people basically being a reseller for you.
Yeah, no, if you just license it out to a sub-licensee, it's more or less like you're just using a middleman. And why use the middleman? Just go right to the sub-licensee if that's the person who's really going to be doing all the work.
But there's also you mentioned the right to modify, and that's sometimes you have some a license to develop the products, not necessarily that you can sell the products. You just play with it, and so you just have a limited license to develop. So when you are representing the licensee, you have really to be careful about making sure that all the scope of license fits the needs of your client, because it's everything that is not licensed, you cannot have it.
Well, the other issue you're dealing with there is if it happens to be an invention, if the licensee makes an improvement on it and there are other patent applications filed, the licensee's name really should go down as a co-inventor. And of course, absent a written agreement to the contrary, any inventor on a patent application can do with it whatever he wants or she wants. So you definitely have to have that built in, that if there is an improvement made, that the licensee assigns the rights to the licensor and perhaps is compensated for any improvements that they make. But you need to have that covered.
Yeah.
You can't have your licensee just running around making improvements and worst of all, filing their own patent applications and not including you on them.
And I think that's a critical issue, because when you're dealing with, especially with technology, when you get a license, you want to improve, and you would just fine-tune maybe the manufacturing processes. So the licensor wants to make sure that there's not going to be a leak in terms of the technology. But at the same time, you want to reward the licensee to make a good job at improving the invention. So the consideration could be giving a license back to the licensor for free, but allowing the licensee to continue using the improvements that is that he has originated.
And once again, this gets back to the ownership issues as well. You've got a licensee out there and they're modifying something. You have to make sure that you know who owns this new intellectual property that's being created. And, once again, it's up to the parties to decide how it gets divvied up. Sometimes it goes to the licensor. Sometimes it's the benefit of the licensee. And as you say, there's a cross-license back, as the case may be. So one of the other scopes that we can delve into is kind of what level things get sold at. You've got brick and mortar stores. You go down to your local strip mall and perhaps you buy a pair of socks or a shirt or something like that with a particular brand. That can be more of the brick and mortar or the actual physical stores. And then with the internet these days, you've got e-commerce. You've got these web stores that are coming up. And it's not uncommon to have exclusive or non-exclusive licenses on these different scopes, of whether you can sell it here in California and you can sell it through the regular brick and mortar stores, and you set different price levels and whatnot for the brick and mortar stores, and then separately have these e-commerce websites where they've got a completely different royalty schedule and scope themselves.
It's a very important question about the market. What's the market for the products? Because you can segment the market in a way that you could cover several different type of licenses. We are going to discuss, in a minute, the territory. But one of the things that a license could accomplish is really to make sure that you have different markets being covered. Sometimes in a patent you have several types of applications. So
some that are more valuable than others.
Yeah, and so you can with one patent address several completely different markets, and so you can give an exclusivity and certain manufacturing rights, while you can give some distribution rights, modification rights to another, and it's two completely different activities. So it's really like slicing, very thin your piece of meat. You have you have your meat, the patent, and you can slice it any way you want, with the caveat that you have to follow the antitrust rules and not be too much of a restriction of trade. But that's important to acknowledge a good analysis of your market for the invention.
So we're basically saying that you have a scope that you can set many various different ways, and you can either exclusively give that to somebody else or non-exclusively give it to a whole bunch of people.
The other thing I think that's interesting is as a practitioner, I think that oftentimes one of your main goals after you first make sure that the client understands what exactly they're trying to license out is to expand their horizons a little bit. I find very often, especially the smaller inventors, will come in with a very narrow idea of what their product is going to be good for, and they need to have that broadened a little bit so that they include all these possibilities. I think that's a really crucial role that the attorney can play, is especially if you played this game for a while, you've seen things that have been sold in different channels and for different purposes, and you've looked at the different ways that you can license out an invention and make money, and I think that you can really do your client a favor by making sure they've at least considered or contemplated these things.
Because many times the clients will walk in and they'll say, I know this guy, he wants to license my invention.
Yeah.
He's really excited about it. And when you ask them, what terms they've talked about, well, it's very simple. He just wants an exclusive worldwide license for everything.
We've heard that before.
Yeah.
And
which is simple.
It's simple.
Yeah.
It's very simple to do, but at the same time, the clients don't often understand exactly what that means. And getting back to ownership, they don't necessarily have the worldwide rights to begin with, or the ability to sell that. So another thing to be careful of.
Yeah.
One of the other parts of the license agreement that you're going to want to tackle would be quality control. And this is particularly relevant in trademarks. When you're talking about a source of the goods and identifying that source of the goods, you want to make sure that whatever is represented by that mark meets your quality standards. And there are certain legal things in trademarks that we can get into, but we'll save that for another discussion. Suffice it to say that it is important not only from a legal standard to make sure that you have quality control, but also just from a business perspective. Whether it's you're making, using, or selling it, you want to make sure that whoever else is doing it is doing a good job. So for manufacturing, you want to make sure that they're manufacturing the goods for you or for somebody else according to your standards. And these standards might not only be, the quality of the product, but also to make sure that you're practicing the invention as you want them to practice it.
Yeah, we've had situations where people start manufacturing and all of a sudden they're manufacturing outside of the patent claims. So are they truly licensing a patent if they're manufacturing outside of the claims? Well, that's a good question. And in terms of the quality control, the other thing, as a practitioner, you really have to be careful of if you're dealing with overseas factories, is oftentimes there's sort of a gradual bait and switch you're going to get, where the first couple shipments of product are just A1 standard. They're using the marvelous components. They're making the products perfectly. And then you start noticing a drop-off in quality. And so you've really got to be careful of that, too, and make sure that once you spot these problems, that you go back and you rectify the problems before any more goods get out there with your client's brand on them. This often involves either a trip to Hong Kong or into China to check on the goods. It may also involve buying some sort of a trade agent over in Hong Kong who can actually visit the factory in China, take a look at the assembly line and start pulling some goods off and testing them. And if there's a problem, send you over those cell phone pictures and say, hey, your mouse is showing up here. The cords are coming two pieces and you got to tie them together. Obviously, you got a problem. You need to rectify that before the goods start showing up on the shelves.
And then from the licensee's perspective, you also want to make sure that whatever quality controls are put in place with the agreement that you're signing, you want to make sure that you can meet those and that they're clearly spelled out so that there's no gray area. You don't want to be caught 6 months, 9 months into the agreement and they're now saying that all of these products don't meet the quality control that they spelled out.
Because the quality control said, I have to like the products.
Right. And I don't like your products anymore.
Exactly. So I'm revoking the license. It just so happens I have another prospective licensee who's giving me twice as much, but that has nothing to do with it. I suddenly decided I don't like your products, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Exclusive agreement.
Exactly. Yeah.
So one of the key element in a license deal is to discuss about the territory. The worldwide license is great, but most of the time you want to approach it again with the view of what's the market and what the licensee could offer in terms of really selling your products and giving you the return through the royalties. So you have to define the territory very precisely. Sometimes you have some regions and it's but it can be not necessarily addressing precisely what countries are in the region. So you need to spell out the list of countries. You have also to bear in mind that if you are let's say, giving a license to one country in Europe, then there could be the question of the exhaustion of rights, because the licensee can sell it, and then once it's sold in one country, it can circulate throughout the European Union. So the checking, whether it's a regional bloc like the European Union. For the U.S., you can split by states, by city. It all depends on the type of rights that you're licensing and the type of products that you are marketing. But it's the more precise you are in the territory, the better, because then you can allocate another territory to someone else, and so it's kind of a puzzle. You need all the pieces to really match.
And I think that's an important point about specifically stating the territories. Some people just want to say, well, I'll do North America.
Yeah.
And because they think, well, there's the U.S. and that's really just all that matters. And you'll give potentially an exclusive license to somebody in North America, but all they do is sell it in the U.S. And then as it turns out, you've got other potential licensees in Canada or Mexico or even Central America. So it would behoove whoever's drafting the agreement or the parties as they're going through it to make sure that they're not giving away too much, even though they're narrowly and carefully defining that region, that territory. It should really only be what they expect is needed by the licensee.
And back to the exclusivity and also the strings attached to it, meaning you want to have some quotas so that in, let's say, for a certain territory where you give some exclusivity, you need to define what are the objectives, because as a licensor, you want the best return. So if you are just giving, a free ride to someone who is going to do nothing in a very large territory, that's not good. So you have to really be not be lazy and really define precisely the territory, define the sales quota, the way you want to market or have your licensee market your products.
I think the other thing to take into consideration is oftentimes you'll be asking for a different royalty schedule depending upon whether or not you have intellectual property in that country. And so, for example, in North America, oftentimes what sells in the United States is going to sell in Canada because we have very similar buying habits. We share a lot of the same chain stores, but Mexico is an entire different ball of wax. What sells in the U.S. may not sell down in Mexico. And then Central America, does it really pay to go down and get those trademarks and patents in El Salvador and Belize and Nicaragua and Panama? Probably not. And yet, do you want to just give those away as part of North America, or do you want to retain those and try to find somebody who's going to put a little more time into each of the Central American countries?
But we almost forgot. When you also grant a territory, you need also to check whether you have rights in this territory, because sometimes you think that it's okay just to have a trademark in the U.S. and you license your trademark in Argentina. Sorry, you don't have a trademark.
Right.
So
you don't own the trademark.
Yeah.
So it's important really to make sure that when you assign a territory, you have the rights on related to this territory.
If I could just
go ahead.
Throw in a real quick practice tip too. If you happen to be representing a company that's trying to either franchise out or find different distributors in different countries, my advice is never, ever, ever let that distributor get the trademark or get any intellectual property for your client, because we've had way too many situations where they'll actually put it in their own name. So to the point where you try to fire the distributor, they say, well, that's fine, you can fire us, but we happen to own the name down here, so you have to do business in our country under a different name. And it sounds ridiculous, but we've seen it happen way too many times.
But it's very convenient.
It is, yeah.
So the distributor is happy to help.
Oh, they are. They're more than happy to help. I think also you need to look at the laws in each country in which you're doing business and look at exactly what kind of protections are built in for employees and distributors and agents. For example, Chile has some pretty harsh laws about firing people, and some countries in Central America also have some very harsh laws. If you happen to be a foreign company and you're firing your distributor, sometimes you have to pay them a year and a half average royalties just to get rid of them. So you want to know that going in.
And also, sometimes you have to register the license, especially with exclusive rights to the equivalent of the USPTO, to make sure that you still have the rights and you can enforce it against third parties. And in certain countries, you also have licensing an invention could be considered as a transfer of technology, and so there's sometimes a rule to register the license as a transfer of technology.
Yeah. I think it's probably also worth pointing out too that we've talked about worldwide license and things like that. With intellectual property, a U.S. copyright is recognized in most of the civilized countries in the world. A U.S. patent and a U.S. trademark is only good in the United States. So when you're counseling a client on whether to do filing, obviously they don't want to file in every country in the world unless you happen to be a Microsoft or an Apple. It just is not cost effective. So when we're counseling clients, usually we look at a few key factors, and this would include how many people live in the country, do the people have enough money to buy your product, culturally, are they going to buy your product, is the country going to enforce your intellectual property, and the other thing that sometimes we urge people to look at is if you happen to start a company, if you have a bunch of renegade employees who go off and start a competing company, are they likely to set up right across the border in another country? But you need to take those things into consideration. And not coincidentally, the retail countries, usually in this order, the U.S., European Union, Japan, Canada, South Korea, Australia, South Africa, countries like that, they tend to be better at enforcing intellectual property rights than the developing manufacturing countries. So we usually urge our clients, if they have enough money to try to patent and trademark outside of the U.S., to go for those other retail countries where their IP is more likely to be enforced. So with respect to royalties, there are a couple of ways that you can couch that. The first you can ask for is a fixed fee. You can ask for a fixed fee per time period. You can ask for a percentage, or what our favorite type of license involves minimum quarterly royalties or a percentage of the gross sales, whichever is greater. I have never seen a situation where my client's been offered a percentage of net profit that I've found acceptable, because it's so easy to bury money. And this is how it happens.
But when you represent the licensee, that's good, right?
Oh, it's great. Yeah, you love it then. But as a licensor, you want to avoid taking a percentage of net profit because it's so easy to bury money overseas when you're a manufacturing concern that it's very easy to show a net profit of next to zero. So we like, again, a minimum quarterly royalty or a percentage of gross sales, whichever is greater. Now, the reason you want quarterly royalties instead of annual royalties is twofold. First of all, if your licensee goes bankrupt December 15th, if you're doing quarterly, you just get burned for 3 months of royalties. If you're doing annually, you're waiting for that royalty check to show up December 31st, and instead you get a notice from the bankruptcy court. That's a real bummer. The second reason is, with a lot of products, they have hot and cold sales periods. So, for example, surfboards, they sell really nicely in spring and summer when the water's warm, and we've got a lot of tourists visiting us to try surfing. They sell very poorly in fall and winter with respect to the cold water, the fact you have to wear a wetsuit to go out, and we don't have as many tourists visiting us. So if you happen to represent a surfboard manufacturer, you want those minimum quarterly royalties in fall and winter when the surfboards aren't selling so well. But when the surfboards are selling off the racks in spring and summer, you want to be pulling in that percentage of gross sales. The ski industry is the exact opposite. Skis sell really well in fall and winter, but for anyone who skis, in spring and summer they're having fire sales on whatever didn't sell over winter. So, if you don't care about the color of your ski and there aren't any huge advancements in technology, spring and summer is when to buy your skis, but there isn't a whole lot of profit built in there. So if you're representing somebody in the ski industry, you want to be pulling that percentage of the gross in fall and winter, but you want to at least be able to rely on your minimum quarterly royalties late spring and summer.
And as a licensee, you want to basically watch out for the opposite,
exactly.
Which is make sure that you can meet those minimums, and that's something that you can, plan for throughout the year. Because even if you're not selling those goods, you would still owe the licensor those royalty fees.
Yeah. So you'd want to be clear with the licensor up ahead, saying, "Hey, okay, we know skis are not going to be selling well in spring and summer. So we want the minimums during those 2 periods to be really, really low. And that would be a reasonable request.
Or reduced royalty rate.
Sure.
Since you got to sell them for half price anyways.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the other thing you want to make sure that you get is audit rights. And I urge, the licensee really should do an audit at least once every few years. An audit won't cost you a whole lot of money, and it's a good way to make sure that people are being honest about things. I've seen a couple of situations where 50,000 goods just suddenly disappeared, and then we had an excuse that they went to South America. Well, South America has a very different warranty situation we have here in the U.S. South America is traditionally known as a black hole because goods go down there and they never come back. Once a good is sold, it's sold, and there's no warranty on it. There's no guarantee. It's not like Costco where you can bring something back 6 months later and say, this didn't work very well 5 months and 30 days after I bought it, so I want to return it. South America, once the money exchanges hands, it's yours. And so, you really have to keep on top of the audit rights to make sure that the same number are being produced as are being sold. And so what you want to do when you audit somebody's books is you want to look at the manufacturing records over in China and make sure those jive with the customs records at Lo Wu. If you bring something across the border into Hong Kong, it's usually trucked across the border at Lo Wu. Freight forwarder should show the same number of goods showing up in a container getting on the ship. Customs, U.S. Customs should show the same number of goods coming off the ship going to the retailer. The retailer should be able to account for where all these goods went. Again, what you're looking for here is you're looking for disappearing goods that they don't have to pay any kind of royalties on.
And I always see in the audit trials the cost of the audit. When there's a discrepancy of more than 5 or 10%, then the cost shifts to the licensee.
Right. Yeah. And so if you're a licensor, you probably want to enter into negotiations by saying, what's the worst your books have ever been off? And the licensee is probably going to say, well, 100th of 1%. Well, then you say, well, then you have no problem signing this portion of the licensing agreement that says that if your books are off by more than 3%, you'll pay for the audit. Likewise.
And the difference.
And the difference, yes. Times 3. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Likewise, if you're the licensee, you want to be darn sure that you're keeping accurate books so you don't get this stuck in your face if the other side decides to license you. So the other thing that you want to be sure that you do when you draft a licensing agreement is have very clear language that handles the termination of the licensing agreement. Now, normally, if you've built into the licensing agreement that there are minimum quantities or minimum royalties that have to be made, if the other party fails to attain those, there's usually a notice provision where you give them notice that you have violated the contract. You give a cure period, 30 days, 60 days, something like that, where the other side can make good and pay the money that was owed. If not, the contract or the agreement is terminated. Now, I want to use the surfboard industry as an example here of how you have to be very clear what happens with goods that are partially produced at the point when you terminate. Now, to make a surfboard, which I actually made about 35 surfboards when I was a teenager.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did. I wasn't very good at it, which is why I'm an attorney.
It took him 35 times.
Yeah. Why I'm a patent attorney instead of a surfboard manufacturer. But you take a foam blank and you shape that down into a shape. Then you put some rice paper on that has the surfer's insignia. So if you happen to represent a famous surfer, you put that on the foam. Then you put fiberglass over it, and you use a laminating resin to attach the fiberglass to the board. Then over the laminating coat, you put a surfacing coat. You sand that down nice and smooth. Over that, you put a gloss coat. Then you use a buffer to rub that out, make the board nice and shiny. Then you put some plastic strips around the edge so the board doesn't get dinged up. Put it in a truck and take it out to the surf shops. So let's say you're representing a famous surfer whose brand name is on some boards, and you have to fire your licensee because they're not meeting the minimums. What do you do with the boards the licensee has finished that are on the truck getting ready to go to the surf shop? Well, let's let them sell those because they're already made. Get to the surf shop, money goes to the prior licensee, you get your cut of it. What about the boards that are already fiberglass? They have your famous surfer's logo down there on the board. Well, let's let them finish them up too. Okay, put the sanding coat on, sand it down, gloss coat, get them out to the surf shops. Well, what about the boards that have already been shaped with your famous surfer's particular shape, and you've got a bunch of rice papers lying around? Okay, let's let them finish those up too. Let's be good guys here. The problem is your successor licensee is going to say, hey, I bought this license for your famous surfer's brand, and the first 6 months, all I had to do is I had to fight fire sale boards that are being sold by your previous licensee, and they're still making them, man. They're still using they're still using all those rice papers. They're bringing in more blanks. They're shaping them down, and they're selling them at wholesale prices, but they just want to unload this stuff. And so I want my money back on my license because I can't sell these things at a profit. So you have to be very, very clear what happens to goods that are partially manufactured. And this is not a one-size-fits-all solution, but one that might fit here is upon termination, the prior licensee has 1 month to finish up and sell everything they have. Otherwise, whatever isn't sold, whatever isn't in the surf shop as of 1 month after termination goes at wholesale to the successor licensee. And that way you have a very clear delineation between when the previous licensee can sell stuff and when the successor licensee can sell stuff. Because remember, if you fire your licensee, you're hoping you're going to have a better relationship with the successor, but it's really bad to start that relationship off with them having to fight a bunch of merchandise that's for sale at wholesale prices.
One other thing with the term of the license itself, and I've seen this with patent licenses, is where the term of the license doesn't really match up with the term of the patent. So in other words, the patent expires, but there's language that states that the term extends beyond that.
Yeah.
And there might be certain situations where the parties desire that, to happen, where I continue to pay royalties even after the patent expires. But oftentimes it creates confusion in the sense that there's really no termination of the license agreement, but the patent expires or has expired, and what do the parties do? So it's always good to take note of what IP you're licensing, when that IP might expire, and make sure that your term of the agreement matches that intellectual property.
Yeah,
but sometimes things are mixed up because you have a license on the patent, on the trademark, on the know-how.
Yeah.
And that's where, when you pay the royalties, you need also to know for what's exactly is, the rights that you're paying.
Or different territories.
Or
where
different
one
territories.
patent expires in one territory, but it's still valid in another.
That's true. A U.S. design patent expires 14 years after the date of issue, but a European design patent, you can extend the lifetime of one of those up to 25 years by paying maintenance fees. So, yeah, when it expires is certainly important. I think as a general theory, if you run a good business, initially a lot of the value of the business is in the patented technology. Hopefully by the time you're either selling the business or by the time your patents are expiring, the value of your business is in your trademark and the brand recognition. So I remember seeing a list in Forbes of the 10 most valuable trademarks, and like Google's trademark was worth, I think, 27% of its market cap value. So with a big business like a Google or a Wells Fargo or a Ferrari, so much of the value of the business is in the trademark that by the time the patents expire, okay, it's not that big of a deal. You still have something worth selling and worth licensing out.
But from the licensee's perspective, especially if you have minimums involved, you don't want to be obligated to continue to pay these minimums when now your competitors can practice that same invention in your territory.
For free.
For free,
yeah.
Without having to pay a license.
And because of your patent, they've gotten a blueprint of exactly how to make it. There's nothing you can do to stop them.
And even with trademarks, you want to make sure that whoever you're licensing the trademark from maintains their trademark to make sure that it's still registered in those particular territories.
And what happens if a patent is cancelled?
Well, what happens?
Yeah. What happens if it's litigated? Who pays for it? Who gets the money? If somebody infringes your patent, does the licensee or the licensor bring the lawsuit? Who has to pay for it? Who picks the law firm? Who gets any resulting judgment? If a re-examination is required or filed for on your patent where somebody's basically trying to destroy your patent, who has to pay for the defense? Who gets to pick the law firm? Who decides when enough money has been spent? These are all very important things that need to be discussed and covered ahead of time, because you don't want to be in a situation where you get that re-examination notice and both sides throw up their hands and say, well, I don't know who's going to pay for this, and I don't want to pay for it, but I want to keep my patent.
Yeah, but at the same time, when the patent is terminated, then you would think that the right to pay the the right to be paid is also terminated.
If I'm the licensee, I'm surely going to want that.
So that's also sometimes, that's also the question of whether or not you put in a license agreement a clause that you would not challenge the right that is being licensed.
Yeah, good for one side, not so good for the other.
Right, but it may not be it may not work for all the rights.
Yeah.
So it's you have to be very careful about inserting such type of clauses.
The course code is 224. The course code is 224.
Well, it's been fun discussing this with you guys.
Yeah, it has. It has.
Licensing can be it can be a fun little game to play.
Yeah.
Especially between both sides, licensor, licensee, making sure that everything's spelled out the way that your client should want it.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes educating the client is part of the process.
But it's also great. It's a really great tool to monetize your invention, because spending lots of money with you guys is one thing, but trying to monetize, and that's also the purpose of really, having a nice patent, a nice trademark, is to monetize, and licensing is really the tool to achieve this.
A flexible tool.
A flexible tool, and we may have to say one thing, is that licensing is not just one license agreement. You can have in very complex agreements, a license clause that just give you the rights to do certain things. It's all about having the rights and giving an ability to someone else to use, to make, to adapt, to sell. So, but it's very flexible. But you have to be very precise on what you're granting. That's the message is not to be lazy on this.
A licensing agreement is a lot like a patent. The terms are incredibly important, and as with patents, especially if you're doing them in foreign languages, you have to be very careful about the words that are used. I know we've done a fair amount of work for various entities in other countries, and sometimes we'll get some translations that are very, very difficult to follow, to put it diplomatically. And because the words you use in a patent can be so crucial to whether or not it's enforceable or whether it's valid or invalid. Likewise with licensing agreements, it pays to have a really good translation done of these documents to make sure that you're not ending up with a foreign document that really is not doing what you want it to do. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this CLE on licensing, and I hope we didn't put you to sleep too badly. So thanks again for watching.